Welcome to Magnet Culture's Workforce webinar, How to Build and Launch a Leadership Development Program. I'm Abby Hagan with Magnet Culture, and I will be joining Cara at the beginning and the end of today's webinar. Amidst the pandemic, many organizations halted leadership development, and as we approach 2024, it's crucial to revive, overhaul, or create these programs for today's evolving workforce. Whether you're building anew, partnering with a training organization like Magnet Culture, or outsourcing entirely, neglecting leadership development isn't a viable option any longer. In today's webinar, Cara will dive into crafting tailored content that truly aligns with your organization's unique needs, mastering the art of strategic program implementation, and determining a next step action plan based on your organization's internal capacity and expertise. Okay, guys, she's going to throw a ton of content at you today, but don't worry, we are recording today's session so you don't have to furiously take notes. Remember that all of our webinars are recorded and available to you at youtube.com/magnetculture. You can check out this year's past webinars even and subscribe so you don't miss any in the future. Today's webinar playback will be available within a few days at that same page, if you'd like to share today's insights with your leadership team after this session. As questions come in mind today, please put those in the Q&A box. You should be able to find that button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be looking at those throughout the session. Please be sure to stay for the entire session because we have a special offer at the end for each of you. Cara, let's go ahead and dive in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Abby. All right, so we're going to get started today. And as I launch into this program about launching or rebuilding or reinstating, revamping, whatever it is that you're doing to your leadership program, I just want to say that this is a special webinar today because I am more so showing you under the hood of how we build what we build and really putting on my instructional designer hat for you today. So as you all know, usually I talk on these webinars about ways to reduce turnover. Well, one of the biggest ways to do that is to make your managers more effective in their roles. So that's why we build all the training classes that we build for our clients from coast to coast. And so today, I have been asked by some folks, can you help us figure out how to launch our own program? You know, whether you're going to DIY it or you're going to completely outsource it, but you know you need to start somewhere, or maybe you're in the middle and you need to collaborate, you're planning to run it yourself, but might bring in some external experts for sessions. So today, that's what we're really going to talk through. And I'm just going to show you kind of some questions that you need to ask yourself or your leadership team, and a lot of things that go along with the process of building and launching a training and development program, okay? Particularly a leadership development program, something for different levels of leadership of managers across your company, okay? So just want to let you know, I'm going to be kind of going under the hood. And for those of you who follow everything that we do here at Magnet Culture, you'll notice there's a lot more words on this PowerPoint than we usually use, but that's because in the recording, you'll be able to go back and look at all those questions, all the bullet points, and make sure as you build your program that you are covering all the bases, okay? So really excited to kind of walk through this with you. And, you know, as Abby said, we cannot pause leadership development any longer. And I will tell you, even before the pandemic, there were a lot of organizations that would contact me about reducing turnover, and they would say, you know, well, we don't have any leadership development in place. And certainly more companies cut that during the pandemic, especially if they were financially strapped. And so over the last 10 to 15 years, you all, I have seen more and more budgets get cut and cut and cut on that leadership development side because it wasn't necessarily essential or a necessity in the budget. And when times get tight, what gets cut? Right? Of course, it's going to be training. But now we're seeing kind of an uptick and a swing back of that pendulum. We're seeing it come back because companies have promoted people into positions or hired them from external sources into leadership positions without giving them the tools to be successful. And we now realize that if we have gone without leadership development, it has been too long. And now it's kind of coming back to bite a lot of us in it's not the culture we want. It's not the communication we want. It's not the tone that we want set when people are walking down the halls in our buildings. All right. So we know that this is no longer an option. So today we're going to cover some details. Like I said, I'm going to give you some bulleted list and questions you need to answer as you build your program. Then we're going to talk about some differences between DIY versus the full outsourcing on the other end of the spectrum, and then that collaborative model somewhere in between. And of course, before we finish, make sure that you stick around as I talk about how to evaluate. Once you've built and launched a program, you really need to think about how are you evaluating it to make sure that it is hitting your desired outcomes, right? And even as you build it, I think it's important to also identify your learning objectives and what is it you're trying to accomplish as you move forward. So I'm going to show you the Kirkpatrick model there at the end. And of course, as Abby said, we've got a special offer for you. So stick around at the end of that as well. So all right, let's start with, if you're going to do a leadership development program, who do we put in it? Who should be the participants? Who should be the attendees? Who should this program be built for and built around? So these are some of the questions that I want you to ask yourself and your team. What level of leadership are we talking about here? Some groups want to offer a Supervisor 101 program for people who've never led other people, for example. Others are looking at more of a mid-level management. They've got a lot of managers across different departments, different locations even, and they really are seeing that those folks, those managers of different departments and teams, they often have the most influence on whether people stay or go. And so a lot of companies are really diving into that management level for more development because they have maybe been promoted into those positions without getting very much training in this space. All right. Now, some of the programs that we teach and that some organizations offer is more for the director level or even executive level. And at times that comes down to business acumen. Sometimes it's more about strategy. And we also want to make sure that we are not allowing directors and executives to be disconnected from the front line. So sometimes it's more about, do you know your people, and ensuring these folks are still in tune with and not making so many assumptions about their staff. Right? So you want to think about that, because a lot of times one leadership development program, it does not serve all. Okay. It's not a one size fits all thing. You got to think about what layer of leadership and what level of content are we going to look at for the folks we want to put in this program. Now, really robust training programs, I'll tell you, they've got classes for all those levels, and they have a leadership development program for new supervisors. They've got leadership development for executives that they're running. They're doing all of that. So don't be overwhelmed right out of the gate, but just know that we all have room for improvement and ways to add more opportunities to advance those leaders across the organization. Another question you have to ask is, are we grooming people to promote them? And I see a lot of emerging leader type programs, which are great. That's usually folks who are high potential or who have been identified as future leaders, and we are grooming them to get into that next level. Or are we giving the leadership development out as a gap filler? Are we filling skill gaps where we're saying, oh, wow, we put people into these positions, they're not really perfect and great at X, Y, or Z. So we need to fill that gap and make them more effective in that skill, right? So that's another question for you. Then this is a big one. Are you going to select people to be in the program? Are you going to have kind of a nomination or application process? Some groups do that. Or are you going to do a formula that is role plus tenure? So for example, I know of a group who says, once you've been in any kind of supervisor or leadership position, they have a new leader program that you have to be in that new position for 6 months. And then you start their program at the next time that it rolls back around. And so they do that because when they get into those new positions, it's already overwhelming to get into a new role and have new responsibilities. So they don't want to shove them into that leadership development program as soon as they get promoted, because they've got to get acclimated first and really understand what's expected of them. So then after the 6-month mark, that's when they would start to join those leadership classes. So you can do, certain titles, certain roles, certain responsibilities that people have, and couple that in a formula with tenure as well. Does it kick in right when they get the job? Is it 6 months, 12 months, maybe 2 or 3 years? Maybe it's another stepping stone for people. They get promoted into a role. They have certain level of access to development or conferences or other learning opportunities. And then maybe 2 or 3 years into the role, then they get into the special leadership development program, right? So you've got lots of options there. And you want to think about how you're going to select the right people to get into the program. Okay. And then you want to ask yourself, okay, are we making this mandatory for everybody who fits that criteria, particularly, not the application process, but if you do the formula, does everybody who hits the formula have to go into the program, or does it become optional as well? And then as far as nominations, if you're going to take nominations, usually you would take self-nominations, but also nominations from others. So if someone else nominates you, can you opt out and say, I'm not interested in the program, right? So lots of questions here just around the participants. And now we're going to talk about the content. So once we know who is going to be in the program, we need to know what to teach. All right. So as I mentioned a moment ago, you really have to think about what skills are needed or desired for each of those levels of leadership. And sometimes the programs are more, some of the content is more around who we are as a company, why we do what we do, the culture, the expectations, and some critical skills like communication and other things, where other programs are not so much about the company. It's all about the skills and the tactics that they want them to change behavior and be more effective at. Okay. So think about which skills at each level are needed. And also another thing to think about is there are some topics that have, of course, a basic level 101 and then an advanced level. And when we started adding more training years ago to our curriculum, I thought, well, we're probably going to have to do advanced level and basic level classes. And what I actually found was it's really great to provide the content as a base foundation content, the same to everyone, but then take your discussion and your activities and your scenarios that you work through, take those to another level. Because it never hurts to be a refresher for even leaders who've been doing things for a long time. Because another thing I have found is people who've been in leadership a long time, they know a lot of the basics and fundamentals of good leadership, good communication, for example, but they're so busy, they're not doing it. Okay. So even our communication class, I thought some of the items that we were putting in our new updated communication class, I thought they were a little too basic. And then we got great reviews and people either said, oh, that was great ideas. I've never been exposed to this kind of content and these tactics. Or people said, I learned some new things, but most of this was a great refresher and a good reinforcement that I have to get back to the basics of doing great things, right? So don't be too afraid of having, people. You can have people from different levels in, but you want the discussions separated. So if you're going to show everybody the same content, you may have leaders at different levels that need to go into different discussion groups so they can handle that at a more basic or advanced type of level. Okay. Hope that makes sense, right? It's up to you how you put people together, but there are ways to kind of branch off and make sure that you're hitting the discussions and questions at the individual's level. Okay. So I would recommend asking before you just assume what you want in a leadership development program. I would recommend asking people, do they feel like there are any missing skills that can fill in the gaps? But also be aware that they don't know what they don't know. So chances are you've got a lot of leaders, for example, who honestly don't know what emotional intelligence really is. Now they can pinpoint certain behaviors behind good or high or low emotional intelligence, but they are not going to put on a survey, I need training in emotional intelligence. And so you may want to also not only ask the people at that level, but ask the people above or below that level. So let's say you're going to do some training with directors. You know that that group just isn't getting any development, and you know that they need to continue evolving. And so you could then ask the executives, what are they looking for in the directors that they're not seeing? And you could ask the managers or even staff below the directors, what do they see that is missing that the directors need to improve on as well? So you can kind of ask more holistically across the organization, what do people want from their leaders? What do they want them to hone in on as those skills? So as I mentioned, it's great to offer refreshers and reinforcement of training, particularly if it's been several years. You know, sometimes people will say, oh yeah, I took a DISC class or EQ or whatever. Oh, I took that 5 or 10 years ago. Well, how much do you remember from 5 or 10 years ago? Unless they really internalized it and really started using it on a regular basis, it may be time for a refresher on those things. So it's totally fine to start with the basics. And then, as I said, take the conversations and the discussions into a deeper dive if you've got folks who are more advanced in their leadership skills, right? So speaking of filling the gaps, we started listening, okay? So every class that we have built over the years came from somebody saying, do you teach this? And for a few years, people were asking, do you teach emotional intelligence? And for those few years, we said no, but we've got some friends who do, and we would refer that to people who were EQ certified. And of course, in 2020, we had a little extra time on our hands as we weren't traveling as much. And so me and the rest of the team, we got EQ certified. We built out our emotional intelligence classes. And so now that's part of that curriculum offering that we have. I say that because you can build over time. You can continue to add more and more classes. And I put this on the screen here so you can go to the recording, hit pause, and then put all of these topics on your survey if you're going to ask which of these would you like to have, right? Which, if you're a manager, which of these would you like to have access to as a class? Or if you're not going to be in the program, which of these would you like your managers or the managers below you to have access to? All right. So this is just a little bit of a smorgasbord of some different offerings that you can start with. There's a million different options. Okay. But you got to start somewhere. So do a survey, check that out. And then remember too, you can't teach everything immediately. In fact, I was talking to a CEO just a few weeks ago, and when he looked at the courses, and he's trying to choose 4 courses that he wants to start with, right? Just wants to get the ball rolling. And so he said, I need to choose 4. And then he looked at the list and he said, oh, but I need all of them. And I said, well, okay, what kind of timing are you thinking about? So we'll go to that here. I said, what kind of timing do you think we can roll out these 4 classes that is going to fit into the manager's schedule? What is realistic? And then he said, well, honestly, I want him to have all these skills yesterday. And so I said, okay, well, I understand and appreciate that sentiment, but we can't do that. And so we've got to start somewhere. And for us, a lot of our new training programs, it's kind of a 4 to 5 week experience because they get a pre-work video of the foundational content. Then we do a live class that is more discussion-based and activities and application. And then they get a 4-week action guide. So you want to think about having them, I'll talk a little more about this in a few minutes, but you want them to kind of work through what they've learned and practice what they learned in the class. And so for us, a lot of folks are now going to a bi-monthly schedule for classes to give those managers time to really let it sink in and really practice and even perfect what they learned in that giving real-time feedback class. And we have to give them time to work on that before we throw the next topic at them, because they can easily get overwhelmed if we stack them too quickly. Now, I have seen groups do very successful weekly leadership programs for an 8 or 12-week period, and they just give bite-sized chunks each week, moving folks through those programs. So it depends on, are you going to throw a lot of information at them at the sessions, or are you going to make more of a weekly or monthly bite-sized program? And then sometimes we have groups that say, Cara, the only thing we have time or the budget for is quarterly. That's the best we can do going into next year. We can't do nothing, right? We can't hold off any longer, but we're only going to be able to do quarterly, which is totally fine as well. So you may want to look at kind of the timing, the budget, what's already on their schedules. We're working on scheduling a group right now, and they said that this particular level of leaders, they already meet every Tuesday morning. So if we're going to offer that bi-monthly calendar for them, it was suggested, why don't we just fit it right into that Tuesday morning session that they already have? And that way it doesn't have to block more time on their calendar. So sometimes you can put it into an already set gathering that you have, and other times you are going to have to say, we're carving out the time for this. Okay. And then you got to think about location, because if you meet in person, that adds more time for that person with the travel time. So some people are able to do in person, if you're either in one location or a few locations pretty close by, people are still doing these leadership programs in person for a half day or a full day. Some groups are completely virtual, right? We've got a lot of those going on. We do both, but a lot of our new ones are going out completely virtual because they've got 17 buildings or 22 buildings or 58 buildings. And so if you want people from all different locations to come in and work together on these programs, then virtual may be the best way to do that. And I'll tell you, these last couple of years, one thing the pandemic did is it gifted us virtual capabilities. So we've got all kinds of folks out there now who understand how to be more interactive with these classes and really have a great learning experience. I know some people are kind of anti-virtual, but I'll tell you, it can work, and it can be very effective with the right expectations and the right equipment and the right mindset. Okay. And then of course, some folks are doing hybrid. And that is, you could start and end your program in person and then do some classes virtually. That's one way to do hybrid. And then another is kind of pre-recorded items on demand, courses or videos with some live classes. That's another hybrid approach as well. So there's lots of options here. So participants, content, timing, location, all of these things, right? So now, how do you choose? Okay, Cara, I'm busy, but the company would love for us to just build this ourselves and DIY this. I personally would rather outsource it, but maybe there's somewhere in the middle. Okay. So, and you might have your heart set on exactly one of these things. Let me give you some questions to think about as you make that decision. All right. So, do you already have access to great content? Does your company already have classes that maybe it put on the shelf, or maybe it's offering to some people, but not enough people? You could expand that out. Or a lot of our clients have access to online learning programs, right? So my clients that are in healthcare, many of them use something like Relias or another source that has already built in, already paid for classes. In fact, we have 5 retention classes in Relias that everybody who already has that platform can already access 5 of our retention courses at no cost. You don't have to call me for those. You just go into your portal and get them. All right. So I've got some friends. I talked to one of my HR friends last week, and she said she just went in and looked through what she already had with online courses and was able to pick out some really great critical skills on communication, leadership, feedback, resilience, those types of things. She was able to pull those out of the system they already have and be able to make something that had great content, that was already accessible, and simply had to assign it to the right people to get her program started. Okay. So think about, what do you already have access to, either internally or through partnerships that are already existing. Okay. So another one is, do you have great trainers and facilitators? Because a lot of times training falls under the HR space, is how I see that happen a lot of times with organizations. And maybe the HR team does have great trainers, maybe it doesn't. And you could tap into staff if you look around and see who is really charismatic, who is a natural trainer, that they kind of go toward those new hires and help them. They sign up to be the buddy, the liaison, they're the welcoming committee, and they love to help train people. You may actually have folks out on the floor or on your staff who would be great trainers that you could tap into and pull in if your HR team or whatever team is putting this together, if you either don't have the bandwidth or you don't have that talent of being a great engaging facilitator. All right. I know when I pick my training team, I am very, very picky. And there are a lot of great trainers out there, but it's got to be somebody who's really engaging and down to earth, and this whole combination of things. So you want to find really great trainers to work on your team. You also have to figure out, do we have the capacity to build and put all the pieces together? That's the pre-launch, right? You got to spend months usually getting all the pieces together, figure out what you're going to offer, how you're going to offer it, who you're going to offer it to, all these things. And then you have to do the launch itself. So then somebody has to run it. Somebody's got to send all the reminder emails and either set up the Zoom room or reserve the physical room if you're on location, those types of things. You really have to think about what all has to go into running that plan. Okay, so do you have the capacity to do that? And some groups, they have the capacity to run it, but they don't have the capacity to build it. Or they have the capacity to build it, but they need external facilitators to come in and run it because they don't want to teach it or don't have that time or that skill set. Okay, so that's another kind of spectrum of what type of capacity do you have, and the skill sets, honestly, on your team to make it an effective program. And then budget, right? Let's talk about budget for a minute. Sometimes we try to DIY things because we think, oh, that'll be cheaper. But if you look at everything that has to be done, if you have to hire another person to build and train this, sometimes that is the better fit. In fact, I've had some people who've called us and said, we want to do this and this and this. How much would that cost, Cara? And we'd love for you to run it and do all of these things. And once we put all the numbers together, I said, honestly, it might be time for you all to hire a full-time training and instructional designer skill, that you want to do these things, especially if they want everything customized to the company very specifically around their language and their desired outcomes and things like that. So sometimes it is actually cheaper to hire internally and do that. Other times it's much cheaper to hire externally to fill in the pieces or to outsource a program while you go do other things that are more important, other initiatives as well. Okay, so you want to kind of think about both sides of that. So let's talk about the DIY for a moment. If you're going to build this, now I've been teaching some other folks in the training and speaking world how to build workshops. I've been going out on the side, actually kind of volunteering out in those communities and saying, here's how you take, for example, a keynote speech and make it into a half day or full day workshop. So I thought I would share that under the hood for you of how you can build this out if you're going to go DIY. All right. And maybe even if you're not doing that, or you've already got programs in place, hopefully something here might be a great nugget that you can add to your program and make it even better. So let's go dive down the instructional design path for just a few minutes and talk about the components of a successful workshop. Okay. So of course you've got to have content, and you're going to transfer that knowledge to people. You want them to learn something and have more information and knowledge coming out of that. We also want to make sure we're not just talking at people, and that we have discussion questions ready to go and get that interaction in the class, as well as activities. So you want to give, for example, a scenario and make sure that you have ideal environment scenarios that are realistic to those folks to say, okay, next week, you've got 3 new hires coming in. How are you going to improve and customize your onboarding program for these 3 people with these 3 backgrounds, right? To show that one size doesn't fit all. And so you've got to have kind of activities that take the knowledge you've given them to apply that into certain scenarios. That's a really great way to beef up that workshop. You want to, of course, provide tools, templates, any scripts if you're teaching people how to speak differently to folks. Like if you're doing a feedback class of how to give better real-time feedback, you're going to want to give them some sample scripts or some sample language around that. And a lot of times you do this through a handout or a workbook or something like that as well. So you want to make sure that you're giving them hands-on tools and tangible things they can take with them to then be able to implement those new skills. All right. Of course, you're going to share best practices and strategies and the how to get better at this skill. But don't forget at the end of the session, please don't forget to leave time at the end for action planning. Because if we just tell, talk, go through content, and then say, good luck, they may not be able to connect. I mean, the people we've put in these positions are smart people, but not everybody has the skill or the mindset or the time to connect the dots of, okay, here's what I learned. Here's what I do with it. Okay. And I've even had groups say to me, Cara, we've done so much training over the years and we've brought people like you in, but then when they went back to their job, they just went back to doing it the way they've always done it. So can you make sure that we give them a plan and give them some tools and give them the path to implement these things, right? So make sure you're going to do that, whether you're hiring somebody to do workshops or you're going the DIY route, make sure that there is an action planning component at the end. And I'm not talking about like the last 5 minutes. All right. It needs to be actual time to sit and internalize, digest what they've learned, and come up with their checklist, their next steps. Okay. So that's something else that you can give them that helps with that is to create a post-event checklist. Now, the way we've done that is after our Leadership Essentials classes, each person gets a 4-week action guide, and it's broken down, most of them week by week, into a checklist or a to-do list of what they can practice, what they can focus on. Okay. So you got to have the content. You got to get some interaction in there, make sure they know how to apply what they've learned. We got to give them the tools and the strategies, and then make sure they're able to implement. Okay. So that's what a lot of this stuff looks like if you're going to start building out any of your own new workshops. And then here's another key that I have learned after more than 10 years with my own training business, and of course, lots of years before that in the training space, is do not cram too much information into one session. Okay. I know you want to tell them this and tell them this, and we also need to cover this, and we also need to cover this. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to step out for a moment and say, anytime you have a retreat, or you bring all your people together for your leadership annual meeting, I want this to be sitting on your shoulder going, don't stuff too much in that session. Because I know we think we've got to go from 9 to 5 and a working lunch, and we got to pack all these things in. But the retention of information drops when people are overloaded and exhausted from taking it all in. Okay. So what we do is we teach 3 hours is a half day, and that's going to have a break at the 1.5 hour mark. Okay. So it is less than 3 hours of content, right? 2 hours and 40 minutes or so of content that we cover in that half day. And then a full day is going to be 2 3-hour sessions with a nice pause, not a working lunch, but an actual lunch break in between. And I'm telling you, when you shrink it down a little bit and you give people breaks and some breathing room, they actually are going to retain more of that information over time, because it wasn't like drinking from the fire hose and getting 8 hours of new information and training at them all at once. Okay. So keep it light. So next up, is don't forget that ChatGPT is available. All right. Now, I taught a webinar several months ago about how to use ChatGPT, particularly for HR professionals and building out training. If anything that I just said about building a workshop seems intimidating or very time intensive, Don't forget, you can go straight to ChatGPT and put in exactly what you're looking for. It's similar to the Google bar. You just put in the bar, I need an activity for a group of 24 manufacturing mid-level managers to talk about fill in the blank, right? You can talk about, I need an activity or a scenario around emotional intelligence or how to give real-time feedback. If you need discussion questions, activities, a template checklist, any of those things, ChatGPT is going to save you a ton of time. All right. So check out the video. If you've never used ChatGPT or aren't real comfortable with it, go check out our YouTube video on how to use ChatGPT. And I'm telling you, it's a game changer. It's going to save tons and tons of time as you try to build this out. In fact, you can even put into ChatGPT. Oh, thanks. Brittany just put the webinar link in the chat as well. You can actually put into ChatGPT, give me a 12-month curriculum draft for a leadership development program for these specific people in this specific industry or profession. You can even do that, and it will give you an outline to start from. It's not going to be your final draft, but it can help you save a ton of time on all of that. Okay. So I know I mentioned, letting them absorb the information. And if I've got any fellow Hamilton fans out there, right, talk less, smile more. And so I think this is a great reminder as we're building workshops and training programs, because you don't want to have 3 hours of content. You want to stop and give them time to absorb it and apply it. So that's why it's so important to have that action planning time and the discussion questions and activities and things like that. Because when I started doing this years ago, I used to fill the whole 3 hours with brilliance, right? I'm joking, but I just was like, I have so much to say. I have to fill the whole 3 hours. And I actually figured out that that was a disservice to people, because then I wasn't giving them time to think about how to implement it. Okay. So slow down on the content and really focus on what are they going to take away from this and how are they going to use it moving forward. All right. So let me give you a sample. Another actually association called a week or so ago and said, I want to launch a leadership academy for our team. Can you help me just flesh this out? What would it look like? And so they can do this themselves. You can launch it yourself, but bring in some experts in a collaborative model, or of course you could outsource this type of thing. But here is a sample spreadsheet of where to start and figuring out what are those components that you need. So this is just a super basic 101, right? We're going to do 6 classes. It's going to be over 12 months. So we're going every other month from January to November. This particular group wanted to do some in-person and virtual because their folks are spread out a bit, but they did want them to get together on occasion. So we talked about, why don't you start the program and end the program with an in-person full day, and then the sessions in between can be virtual on Zoom or wherever, right? So we even talked about starting and ending with a 3-hour class of content, but then also building in some team building. Because if you've got people in the room together, you want to maximize that in-person opportunity. And we're not talking about trust falls and marshmallow towers, okay? But just doing some real team building of getting to know each other, even having those lunch times and break times to chat with one another. That is team building as well, and trust building also. So he wanted to start with and end with that in-person full day, and then do the virtual classes. So we kind of talked through all those topics that we offer and that he has access to, or his board members could come in and be able to offer those things as well. And so this was kind of one of the drafts that we built for that. So hopefully this gives you a layout of where you can start. You can make it 8 sessions, 12 sessions, 4 sessions, monthly, weekly, quarterly, whatever of those things work for you. But if you just start with a spreadsheet and try to figure out what all do you want to fit in and what makes sense there, that's what you want to do. And of course, that number column, that he's hoping to have 24 people in the program. We have found with the virtual classes in particular, that if you go over 24, that's when people start to disengage. and you can kind of lose people on a virtual call. But if you keep it under 24 people, then at least our trainers, we're trained and we set expectations of, calling on people and making sure that when they go into their small breakout rooms, that they are engaged and ready to talk, and it's cameras on, mics on, all of those types of things. So you may decide you want your program to have 12 or 16 or 20 people or 50, who knows? But make sure too that you're thinking about how many people does it make sense for that delivery mechanism in particular. Okay. And then if you're going to run a program like this, you want to have a kickoff and a celebration. All right. You definitely want to set expectations right up front. We made a kickoff kind of guide, I guess you would call it, a participant guide. And it says, we expect your cameras on. We expect full attention. We expect no multitasking during the live classes, right? And it gives the time frame of what all we expect them to do if there's pre-work and post-work and things like that. So think about having a kickoff experience where you bring people together virtually or in person and set the tone of what you want to accomplish and also what's in it for them, right? Sell them on why they need to come to every class and be a part of this, because it's going to help them sleep better at night when they reduce the team conflict and the team stress. And also, hopefully, no matter what leadership development you're doing, it will hopefully reduce employee turnover, right? So that's going to be a huge win. So set those expectations, tell them what's in it for them. And then at the end of the program, celebrate, 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 whether it's pizza, ice cream, cupcakes. We actually give out, as you can see on the screen, these lapel pins. I've got one here. It's about a quarter size almost. And this lapel pin says retention champion. So when people get finished with our program, we actually deem them as a certified retention champion, and they get the certificate and the pin and everything. And so whatever leadership academy program you put together, or an institute or a boot camp or whatever you want to call it, have a celebration when people successfully complete that, because people really do like to level up and be able to say now they are certified, or now they successfully completed this program. And certificates are so easy, to be able to give folks. And it really does mean a lot to our workforce, especially those folks if they haven't had a lot of development opportunities in the past as well. Okay, so let me share another program. My friend Kelly over at Brightspire, she was nice enough to share with me the details of her program that she has put together, her and her team. And also, this is a collaborative one. So they built it, they run it, and they bring in experts, not just those of us at Magnet Culture, but she's got a couple other expert speakers and trainers that she pulls in. So I wanted to tell you about her Inspire Leadership Academy that they have created. And for them, it's an in-person program. They happen to have several senior care buildings that are pretty close proximity to one another. So they're able to do their sessions in person every month, and they get together for a full day once a month for 8 months. So believe it or not, they're covering all of these topics that you see on the screen. Most of them are kind of a half day, an hour to 2 to 3 hours, each of these topics. And I highlighted the items in red here to show you those are the ones they have an external person come in and teach. So the ones that are in black, they have figured out that they have that content, or they have access to that content. They have the trainers in-house to cover those topics. And then she has brought in, every other month or so, brought in experts. So of course, I'm guessing you can figure out which ones we teach. Retention and generations, right? Those are two of our specialty areas. So she has us come in every single year with every new cohort, and we teach those classes. So thanks, Kelly, for sharing this and telling us more about your program. In fact, she even shared some behind the scenes tips and tricks that I wanted to tell you as well, because I didn't even think of some of these things when I was putting this together. So she rotates the location so that folks can see each other's venue, right? Whether you're on a healthcare campus or manufacturing plant or whatnot, she wanted to do tours and really show people around. So they rotate the locations. Again, they're in, a couple hours proximity of each other, so that's doable for them. They allow leaders and non-leaders to nominate themselves and others. And she did say that doing that nomination process has helped them find some hidden gems of people who want leadership development, and they didn't even realize that person was interested in being a leader and really climbing the ladder. So that nomination process has worked really well for them. They also, whenever they're going to put people in the program, they go straight to that person's immediate supervisor, whatever level it is, and they make sure there is buy-in, because they don't want the leader. And I've had this happen in our classes in the past, and now we address it. But before we learned to address it up front, we had a leader that would tell people, oh, you don't have to go to those classes. I mean, if you have time, that's fine. But if you're busy, don't worry about it. Well, the company is still paying for the classes. And so they want the people in there that are supposed to be in there. So that is not okay. And that's why Kelly figured out you have to go to that immediate supervisor, get buy-in, and make sure that they are going to tell them to go to their classes when it's time. All right. Also, she made note to tell those supervisors, by the way, do not nominate people because you want us to fix them. That is not what this program is about. It's development, and we're not going to fix someone who's not hitting your expectations. That is a coaching opportunity. Okay. So those are some really cool tips. They also incorporate the DISC assessments, which we put in some of our programs too. They offer DISC assessments for each of the individuals in the program, and even have individual coaching sessions, 1 or 2 or 4 sessions throughout the year to really help those leaders identify their own style and areas for improvement. Okay. So we also want to think about, if you're going to do a long-term program, like a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month leadership program, can you incorporate something like they've done at Brightspire, which is a pre-approved group project? Can they take on an initiative, whether it's a retention initiative or a recruiting initiative or something else, right? Some kind of culture improvement initiative. Can they take that on, usually in small groups or as individuals, and within that 6 or 12 months, get a project delivered? So that's something they've incorporated into this program as Kelly has launched her Inspire program. And finally, a cool thing they do too, because they're in person, is when they go to the different venues, they invite the graduates from previous years to lunch. So then they're building more camaraderie and really integrating people from different locations and different levels, different lengths of tenure in to get to know each other, which is really cool. All right. So I hope that was a helpful example of where you can see kind of what she built. You could DIY that whole program. You could bring in certain people like Kelly does, or you could completely outsource that type of program as well if you wanted somebody else to take care of that. Now, whether you are collaborating, doing the mix, or you're going to completely outsource it, you want to think about, are we going pre-packaged and more cohort based? Like, all right, some of you have been through or know about our workforce retention boot camp. That is a 6-month program for 24 people. They start and end the whole program together. They go through lockstep, 8 sessions, one after another, and then they graduate from the program. That's a pre-packaged program, and that can work. Other groups are doing a little bit more of an a la carte, a little more flexible, which is now our new Leadership Essentials program. And it's because sometimes they've got turnover. And so they might try to start a program with 24 people, but they only end with 16 if folks are leaving. And that might be an issue. And so some groups are doing a little more a la carte, and also where you can put people into the classes later. So let's say you start in January, but someone joins in March, and it's okay that they join the April class, because you don't have to have the January class to come to the April class. So you may want less prerequisites and have a little bit more of a choose your own adventure type of a la carte training program too. So that's what we did with our new Leadership Essentials class, because coming out of the pandemic, a lot of our clients said across the country, Cara, we just can't do the in-person full days anymore because we just don't have the time and the staff to pull all the managers off the floor. And so now we've transitioned a lot of those clients over to this new model with the 30-minute content video that's on demand before the class. Then we have a 90-minute live facilitated discussion, and then that 4-week action guide. Okay, so that's kind of a hybrid approach as well. It's all virtual, but it's the on-demand pre and post work with a live class that's facilitated by a trainer. Okay, so you may want to try to figure out how set in stone do you want your program, or do you just want it to be these classes and this curriculum that's available, but then we can put whoever we want in each class. Okay, it's a little less structured, not quite like an academy type of thing, but instead just more of a training curriculum that you offer throughout the year to different levels of leaders. Okay, so let's talk for a minute before we run out of time here about the Kirkpatrick 4 levels of training evaluation, because how do we know that it was even worth the time and money to do this class, right? Somebody's going to ask you that. And if they're not asking beforehand, they're going to ask you afterwards about the results. What did you get from it? Or how good was the class? Was it a success? How do you define success? Well, there is a great book out there called Kirkpatrick 4 lessons, or not lessons, 4 levels of training evaluation, and it walks you through this. So it's best to be familiar with this as you're building your program and setting your learning objectives. And also, what metrics are you going to measure at the beginning and the end? One thing that we do is we love to ask the same questions at the beginning and end of a session, even just one training session. And we focus on the competency and confidence in that person. So whatever the learning objectives are that we want them to come away with, we ask them at the beginning of the workshop, how competent do you feel in these skills? And how confident do you feel in these skills? And then at the end of the workshop or the 2-day retreat or whatever we've done, then we'll ask again, same exact questions, how competent and confident do you feel in that material? And then you can easily see some of the growth there, right? And figure that out. Now, if we go back to this Kirkpatrick method, there are 4 different levels, because I'm not able at the end of a class to tell you, did it impact the business? Did they reduce turnover after this 3-hour session? Well, we're not going to know that for a while. That's going to take a long time down the road to see if anything was actually implemented and changed because of the session. So these levels are, 1 is reaction. That is simply, did you like this class? Did you think the facilitator was effective, right? We've all taken those surveys after any kind of session or at a conference, 1 to 10, 1 to 7, 1 to 5, that type of thing. So that's simply the reaction. What kind of reaction did people have to the class? Did they like it or not? Did they feel it was valuable or not? The second level is, did they actually learn something? And usually we're going to measure that with a test or a quiz and ask them questions from the material, make sure they actually learned the answers. Okay. The third is, did they change behavior? Did they change behavior after the class? So we now are offering a 60-day post-workshop or post-retreat type of questionnaire where we ask, what have you implemented since you took the class? Did you implement anything you've learned? Did you change your behavior in any way? And that is that 3rd level of behavior change. The 4th one, of course, is the business results. What kind of outcomes happened for the business? Did we reduce turnover after this training program, right? Or academy or whatnot? Did we improve sales because we offered that sales training academy? Whatever it is that you want to offer, the getting to the business outcome is the real gold mine. However, it is really, really difficult to get to that level of training evaluation. And sometimes it's hard simply because it's tough to isolate. If you're changing pay and revamping your onboarding and doing a leadership development program, it's going to be hard to know if your retention drops, which of those areas moved the needle. Right. And really, it's going to be a combination of those things. So don't be too hard on yourself if you're not getting to that business metrics on level 4, because it has gotten quite a bit harder and really difficult to isolate particular initiatives, if that makes sense. All right. So take a look at that book, that Kirkpatrick book, if this is something you really want to dive into and get better at the metrics, because it'll also help you make your case of what you're going to do. Okay. So All right, with just a few minutes left here, I hope I did not just completely overload you. But remember the recording, right? There's a recording. So you can always go back, play it again, slow it down, and that can help. But I hope also that you're seeing now, because some of you have come to me and said, hey, I've got to build this program and my company thinks it will be cheaper for me to just do it. And it's not always cheaper. It doesn't always save money just to DIY it if you've got to spend all this time and find other support and resources and skills you don't have and things like that. So just want to keep that in mind. And of course, call me, message me, anything. I'm happy to help. And this is what we do. This is why we are solely in the line of training leaders, making managers more effective in order to reduce turnover, right? We found that need in the market, and we've built our entire company here at Magnet Culture to deliver on that gap that exists in so many organizations. So we can help you save that time as well. If you do have to make the case to get resources, because sometimes they say, I know we need leadership development, but they will not give me the budget, that type of thing. So think about this, all right? The training magazine came out in the last report they did was this past November. So the 2022 average was $1,207 per employee that was being spent on training. Okay. Now you can think about the employees, it's more of onboarding training, but then up into leadership development, it's going to conferences, it's leadership development programs like this and things like that. So I would say too, if I were to look at the data more closely, I believe that we're spending a lot more, as we should, on managers per person. So you may want to break down the per person investment. For example, if you find a program that's $24,000 for 24 leaders, then you need to sell that as it's only $1,000 per leader to do this whole program, right? Sometimes if you break it down in that way, it is an easier sell and a bit better ammo to talk to your CFO about and figure out what that investment is. Okay. So we just put that training magazine report into the chat as well, and we'll put it in the show notes so you can use that report, show them, go show them. It even breaks down into small companies, mid-sized companies, large companies, and things like that. Okay. So definitely check that out. All right. I wish we had time for questions today, but if you submitted a question and I have your name attached to it, I will get back to you. If you did it anonymously or you want to reach out to me, please do so on LinkedIn. And remember, the best time to plant a shade tree was 20 years ago. Just like training, the best time was 20 years ago to be doing leadership development. But what's the next best time to plant a shade tree? Today, and not to go a day longer without somebody being able to enjoy that shade down the road as well.